It was a weird morning because on PFT Live, while we were on the air, the news came via the patent-pending 5-minute heads-up from Shefty right before Stephon Gilmore announced it himself that Gilmore was going to be released by the Patriots. Technically wrong. He wasn't released, and the Patriots have played this game. Others have done it as well. You put the word out that the guy is going to be released, and then you wait for the phone to ring. And ring the phone did. The Carolina Panthers enter. They acquire the Stephon Gilmore contract without a new contract, balance the current deal for a 6th-round pick in 2023. Scott Fitterer, the GM of the Panthers, says no new deal for Gilmore, but they're open to one. And now we see what happens. A strange set of circumstances, and because it was a trade, Gilmore remains on the PUP list and cannot play until after Week 6, Myles.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things here. You know, the Carolina, I think, really wanted to get out in front of this thing because once it came out that the Patriots were going to get rid of Stephon Gilmore in some way, and obviously with the release thing, I mean, like you said, teams do this all the time. We saw it in March with the Raiders and Rodney Hudson, and then all of a sudden Arizona enters the chat and the Raiders end up getting a 3rd-round pick for him. But then I think across the league, everybody's like, oh, man, Stephon Gilmore is going to be available? Ooh. And Bruce Arians was even asked about this down there in Tampa Bay. And he said, well, we're going to kick the tires on anybody. If it's a fit, it's a fit. And we'll see. And then Carolina steps in front of the line of its division rival and says, no. Patriots, we'll give you this 6th-round pick. And yeah, we'll take care of the salary. Just we want to make sure we get this guy. And so I credit Scott Fitterer for this, you know, the general manager of the Carolina Panthers, because not only do they get somebody who can be an elite corner, they prevent that player from going to a division rival. And you know that Tom Brady was probably on the phone thinking, man, we could definitely use this guy. We've got a couple of cornerbacks out that are probably going to be on IR. It's Carlton Davis. Looks like he's going to be going to IR too, along with Sean Murphy-Bunting. So like, the Buccaneers were going to be involved in this thing somehow, but because Carolina made that trade, now they've gotten, like I said, they've gotten a good player, and they've also prevented a division rival from getting him too.
Here's what I'm interested in knowing, and I haven't seen this yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, Myles, because I often am, and I don't get mad when someone corrects me until they do, so tread lightly. I'm kidding with all of that. I didn't see this, and maybe it's out there. Is Gilmore on board with being traded to the Panthers? He went to South Carolina, so you could say it's kind of a homecoming, but it could have just been a preventive measure by the Panthers saying, hey, Gilmore's not happy with his contract. We're not necessarily going to give him a new one, but you know what? We'll give up a 6th-round pick in 2023 if it means the Buccaneers don't get him, because right now the Buccaneers are wounded, literally and figuratively. Their corners are dropping left and right. They're relegated to Richard Sherman, who doesn't fit that defense. And even though, you know, he has the legitimate excuse, he just showed up last week, he was not good on Sunday night. And Gilmore would have been a huge upgrade. I just can't help but wonder whether or not the Panthers went ahead and did this deal, even if there's a chance Gilmore continues to hold in, because many believe that's what this has been from day one, a hold in by him because he's not happy with his contract. And maybe he won't play for the Panthers until he gets a new one, and maybe the Panthers don't care.
Maybe not, but I mean, from the things that I've seen, and I don't think I've seen any quotes directly from Stephon Gilmore, but from what was floating around the internet today, it seemed like this was something that he wanted. It's not only that he went to South Carolina, he's from Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is just across the border from Charlotte. And I don't know how many people are really familiar with the North Carolina, South Carolina border right there, but like Charlotte is literally a few miles away from Rock Hill. And Rock Hill is actually where the Panthers are building their new training facility down there. So that's very, very close in the area. And so it really kind of is more or less a homecoming for him to be able to go down there. So it seems like this is something that maybe even the Patriots were doing right by him by sending him to Carolina, besides the fact that they're getting a pick back for him, whereas if they had just released him, that wouldn't have happened at all.
I just say that because the belief had been that a trade's not going to happen unless he gets the contract that he wants. Maybe the Panthers are the one team where he would say, I'm fine with it, I'll show up, I'll play, even though I wasn't willing to play under the terms of this contract with the Patriots. I'll play under the terms of this contract with the Panthers, become a free agent in March, and then go wherever I want to go to the highest bidder, and maybe in the interim they work out a deal where he stays with the Panthers over the long haul. But, for any position other than quarterback, I think you trade for a guy whether he likes it or not, because what are your choices? You show up or you don't. You get paid or you don't. Quarterback is the only one where I would only want a guy if he wants to be on my team. But it worked out for the Patriots. They got something for a guy they were going to cut. Anytime you see an announcement in the morning that a guy is going to be released, keep in mind the possibility that it is part of a ruse to get the phone to ring so someone will trade for him. It's happened far too often in recent years, Myles, to not be the first thing we think about when we hear the news early in the morning. I mean, technically, the Cowboys could have traded Jalen Smith between last night and today at 4 o'clock Eastern. No one was going to take on that contract, but always be thinking of that. It happens far too often for it to not be something that is the first thought that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, of course. And, that's one of the ways that we in the media kind of play a role in the front offices of different teams. Like, they know, the teams know exactly what will happen once that thing gets leaked, right? The phones are going to start ringing, and they're going to say, okay, well, do we actually want to do this for a 6th or for a conditional 7th sometimes? And that's all it's going to be. And basically, it's just telling teams, hey, get your last bids in, because we're actually going to do this, and we don't want any more of this happening throughout the rest of the week. This is the last day. So if you maybe want this guy and you want to try to prevent somebody else from getting him, then yeah, this is the time for you to say, this is what we're willing to offer. This is our best offer, and maybe we can make a deal. But yeah, it's absolutely a tactic, because unless that thing is actually hit the transaction wire, he's not actually released until he is released.
Speaking of Jalen Smith, Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reports that the Packers are in on Jalen Smith. I heard from a GM today who said Smith has nothing left. So all it takes is one team. But there may be plenty of teams that are not interested. Prod CV Spur had this question for us on Twitter. We put out a mailbag call. We'll have more questions later, but this relates to Gilmore, so we'll handle it now. Is Stephon Gilmore being traded for a 6th-round pick more of an indictment on his regression as a player, or just the Patriots being desperate to ship him out of town when they couldn't come to terms on an extension? Odd to see a recent former Defensive Player of the Year go for such little value. I think it's a no-brainer. The Patriots were at an impasse. They couldn't work something out. It was clear it was coming to an end. They could either pay him for the rest of the year to either play or not play, or play reluctantly, or whatever, or get value and move on. They got value and they moved on. And I really don't think it was a coincidence that this all came to a head after the Patriots played the Buccaneers.
Yeah, especially because we know what the Buccaneers cornerback situation is. I don't think it's much of a coincidence either, because, again, if they did have to end up releasing him, then that's probably one place that he would go. I mean, if Tom Brady was recruiting Richard Sherman, then you bet your rear end that he's going to recruit a former teammate of his that won Defensive Player of the Year when he was still in New England. But, I think that it's kind of a combination of both to sort of answer that question, because it's not necessarily, I think, an indictment. I think people in the public tend to inflate what players' trade value really is, because a lot of the time when you think about what guys are really traded for, it's not what we think it would be, right? And contracts figure into this and everything. So because the Panthers are picking up so much of that salary, they're not going to give back draft compensation that it would be if the Patriots were, right? If the Patriots were still paying Stephon Gilmore that money, then you might get a little more value back in terms of the draft pick compensation. So maybe like a 3 or a 4. I don't necessarily think that Stephon Gilmore has dropped off all that much. But at the same time, you're still talking about a player who's been on the PUP list for so long, and he can't even come back until after next week, right? So there's a little bit of that factoring in there. He has this now injury history, but still, if he is right, then he's an elite cornerback. And that's why the Panthers want to go out and get him, because if they can add another piece to that defense, which has played well, really well for the most part this season, then that could really be something that elevates them into maybe the upper echelon of NFC teams.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.